On a cold winter evening, as a fierce snowstorm began to blanket the quiet mountain town, Ethan had no idea that his life was about to take an unexpected turn. At 32 years old, Ethan was a skilled mechanic who had built a modest yet fulfilling life in this small town nestled beneath towering, snow-capped peaks. His days were usually filled with repairing cars, fixing machinery, and helping the townsfolk with whatever they needed. Ethan had moved to this town a few years ago, seeking solace from the chaos of city life. Living alone in a small apartment above his workshop, he had poured his heart and last savings into making his business a success. The locals trusted him implicitly, not just because of his craftsmanship, but also because of his quiet kindness and reliability. The town came alive during the winter season, thanks to the influx of tourists drawn by the renowned ski resort perched on the nearby mountain. Yet, this winter was different. A severe weather warning had dampened the usual excitement, and most tourists had cut their trips short to avoid the impending storm. Despite the worsening conditions, Ethan received a call that day from the opulent Summit View Hotel, the town's newest and most luxurious retreat. They needed emergency repairs to secure the property before the storm intensified. Ethan, ever dedicated to his work, agreed without hesitation. Little did he know, this routine call would lead him to a life-altering encounter. As the snowstorm raged on, the mountain roads became treacherous. It was on one of these icy paths that Ethan would cross paths with a woman in desperate need of help, setting the stage for a story of courage, connection, and hope. Ethan's life in the small mountain town was simple yet deeply fulfilling. After years of living in the hustle and bustle of the city, he had craved a quieter, more meaningful existence. Moving to this secluded town had been his way of finding peace. His workshop, modestly named Ethan's Repairs, sat at the edge of the main street, a comforting sight for locals who relied on him to fix everything from snowblowers to car engines. Though he lived alone, Ethan had built strong relationships with the community. Locals respected him for his honesty and skill, often referring to him as the town's unsung hero. In return, Ethan found joy in his work, especially during the bustling winter season, when the town came alive with tourists drawn by the allure of the nearby Summit View ski resort. This winter, however, was shaping up to be more challenging than usual. A storm unlike any the town had seen in years was on the horizon, and the locals had braced themselves for its impact. Shops boarded up windows, residents stocked up on supplies, and many tourists fled before the storm hit. The Summit View Hotel, a newly opened luxury retreat nestled halfway up the mountain, was particularly vulnerable. Its sprawling glass facades and modern design, though stunning, required special reinforcement to withstand the extreme weather. The hotel management, aware of Ethan's reputation, had called him earlier that day, requesting urgent repairs. Ethan arrived at the hotel just as the first flakes of snow began to fall. The towering building stood against the darkening sky, its lights casting a warm glow against the encroaching storm. The staff handed Ethan a checklist of tasks, and he worked tirelessly, securing windows and reinforcing structures to ensure the guests' safety. As he worked, Ethan couldn't help but notice the subtle air of luxury that surrounded the hotel. Everything from the polished floors to the elegant decor hinted at wealth and refinement. Somewhere among the guests, Aurora, the daughter of Lucas, the hotel's owner, was preparing for a journey. Unknown to Ethan, their paths would cross in the most unexpected of circumstances. By the time Ethan finished his tasks, the snowstorm had intensified. He left the hotel, carefully navigating the icy mountain road back toward town. The blinding snow and slippery terrain made the journey treacherous, but Ethan's experience and well-maintained truck gave him an edge. However, as he rounded a sharp bend, something unusual caught his eye. A luxury car struggling against the worsening conditions. Its tires spun helplessly, and before Ethan could react, the vehicle skidded out of control, hurtling backward and slamming into a tree. Instinctively, Ethan stopped his truck and leapt into action, rushing toward the wrecked car. He had no idea who was inside, But he knew one thing for certain: someone needed his help. Ethan's heart pounded as he approached the wrecked luxury car. Snow whipped against his face, and the icy ground beneath his boots made every step treacherous. The car, a sleek black model completely unsuited for the harsh conditions, was crumpled against a tree. Inside, he could just make out the motionless figure of a woman, slumped in the driver's seat. He tapped on the window, shouting, "Can you hear me?" But there was no response. The airbags had deployed and the woman remained unconscious. Ethan tried the driver's door, but it was jammed from the impact. Wasting no time, he moved to the rear door, which thankfully opened. Snow fell heavier now, coating the car and the surrounding trees. Ethan's breath came in sharp bursts as he assessed the situation. The woman, who looked to be in her late 20s, had long blonde hair and was dressed in a thick coat and a striking red scarf. He quickly reclined her seat to keep her neck stable and carefully pulled her out of the vehicle. The cold was relentless, and the icy rain stung his face, but Ethan's focus never wavered. He cradled the woman in his arms, ensuring her head and neck were supported, and made his way back to his truck. Laying her gently on the back seat, he checked her pulse. It was faint, but steady. Reaching into his pocket for his phone, Ethan cursed under his breath when he saw the lifeless screen. The battery was dead. Frustrated but determined, he jumped into the driver's seat, started the truck, and began the treacherous drive back to town. The mountain road was barely visible under the growing layer of snow, and his truck's tires struggled for traction even with chains. Ethan gripped the wheel tightly, muttering quiet prayers under his breath as the storm raged around him. He glanced in the rearview mirror at the unconscious woman. "Hang in there," he said aloud, his voice resolute. The drive felt endless, each bend in the road a battle against nature's fury. Finally, the town's dim lights came into view, and Ethan breathed a sigh of relief. The paved streets offered some reprieve, allowing him to pick up speed as he neared the hospital. Pulling up to the emergency entrance, Ethan jumped out and ran inside, his voice echoing through the hallway. "I've got an injured woman in my truck. She needs help immediately." The urgency in his tone sent hospital staff rushing into action. Nurses and orderlies followed him outside with a stretcher. Ethan opened the back door, his heart racing as they carefully transferred the woman from his truck to the stretcher. "Do you know her name?" one of the nurses asked. Ethan shook his head. "I found her on the mountain road. She crashed her car in the storm." The medical team quickly wheeled her into the emergency room. Ethan followed but was stopped at the doors by a nurse who said firmly, "We'll take it from here. Please wait in the corridor." Left alone in the waiting area, Ethan paced anxiously, the adrenaline from the rescue still coursing through him. Questions swirled in his mind. Who was she? What was she doing on the mountain road during such a dangerous storm? Just as he was about to sit down, the hospital lights flickered and then went out completely, plunging the building into darkness. Panicked voices filled the hallway, and the hum of medical equipment abruptly stopped. Ethan's instincts kicked in. He flagged down a security guard who was hurrying past. "What's going on?" "The storm knocked out the power, and the backup generator isn't working," the guard replied hurriedly. Ethan took a deep breath. The hospital was in chaos, and he knew lives were at stake. "Take me to the generator room," he said firmly. The guard hesitated, then nodded, recognizing the determination in Ethan's voice. Together they navigated the darkened corridors, the beam of the guard's flashlight leading the way. When they reached the generator room, Ethan assessed the situation. The machine was an older model, its motor casing scorched from a short circuit. "I can fix this," he said, grabbing a toolbox. As the storm howled outside, Ethan worked methodically, his hands steady despite the tension. He replaced burnt cables, reconnected circuits, and tightened every bolt with the precision of a craftsman. Finally, he signaled the guard to try starting. The generator sputtered, then roared to life, flooding the room with light. A wave of relief washed over Ethan as he packed up his tools and hurried back to the waiting area. His thoughts immediately returned to the woman. As he sat down, his mind raced with concern for her condition. The storm outside raged on, but inside the hospital, Ethan had done all he could for now. The hospital, now illuminated thanks to Ethan's quick work on the generator, was slowly regaining order. Nurses moved briskly through the hallways, tending to patients, while the hum of medical equipment returned to the background. Ethan, sitting in the waiting area, still couldn't relax. His thoughts were fixed on the woman he had rescued. Minutes felt like hours as he paced the corridor. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up, and the muffled sounds of emergency activity heightened his unease. Just as he sat down again, the doors to the emergency room swung open, and a nurse stepped out. "Sir," she said, her voice calm but firm, "the woman you brought in is stable for now, but she's suffered a severe concussion and some neck trauma. The doctors are doing everything they can." Ethan nodded, relief washing over him, though his worry lingered. "Thank you," he replied. As the nurse walked away, Ethan's thoughts wandered. Who was she? What had brought her to the mountain road in such terrible conditions? He realized he still didn't even know her name. Just then, the hospital doors burst open, letting in a gust of icy wind. A man in his 50s, wearing an expensive coat, strode in with a look of desperation etched on his face. He headed straight to the reception desk. "My name is Lucas Halden," the man said, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm looking for my daughter, Aurora. I was told she was in an accident." Ethan's ears perked up at the name. Aurora, that must be her, he thought. He stood as Lucas turned, scanning the waiting area. Their eyes met and Ethan approached him. "I'm Ethan," he said, extending a hand. "I found your daughter on the mountain road. She crashed her car in the storm." Lucas's expression shifted from panic to cautious gratitude. "You're the one who saved her?" he asked, gripping Ethan's hand tightly. Ethan nodded. "I did what I could to get her here safely." Before they could say more, a doctor appeared. "Mr. Halden?" the doctor said. "Your daughter is stable for now. She suffered a concussion and some neck injuries, but we believe the worst is over. She's responding to treatment." Lucas exhaled deeply, his shoulders relaxing as relief washed over him. "Thank you, doctor," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. The doctor turned to Ethan, a small smile on his face. "And we owe a lot to you. If it weren't for your quick actions, things could have been much worse, not just for her, but for the hospital. Fixing the generator was a lifesaver." Lucas's gratitude deepened. "You fixed the generator too?" he asked, his eyes widening. Ethan shrugged humbly. "It just seemed like the right thing to do." Lucas shook his head in disbelief. "You've done more than I could ever thank you for." Moments later, the nurse returned to update them. "Aurora is awake," she said. "She's asking for the man who saved her." Ethan hesitated, glancing at Lucas, who nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead," Lucas. Ethan followed the nurse down the hallway to Aurora's room. Inside, Aurora lay propped up on a hospital bed, her blonde hair slightly disheveled and her face pale but calm. When her eyes met Ethan's, a faint smile crossed her lips. "You're the one who got me out of that car," she said softly. Ethan nodded, stepping closer. "You gave me a scare back there," he replied with a small smile. "How are you feeling?" "A bit sore," she admitted, her voice still weak. "But I'm alive thanks to you." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of the storm outside. "Why were you on that road in the first place?" Ethan asked gently. Aurora's gaze shifted. "I was trying to get to my dad," she said. "I didn't want him to worry about me being alone during the storm." Ethan nodded, understanding. "Well, next time maybe wait out the storm," he said with a teasing tone, trying to lighten the mood. Aurora smiled faintly. "I think I'll take that advice." Lucas soon joined them, and the room filled with quiet conversation. The bond between Ethan and Aurora was subtle but undeniable, a connection forged in the chaos of the storm. As the hours passed, Lucas expressed his gratitude repeatedly, even offering Ethan a generous financial reward, but Ethan humbly declined. By the time Ethan left the hospital, the storm was starting to ease. He walked out into the cold night, his thoughts lingering on Aurora and the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. The following morning, Ethan was back in his workshop, sipping a much-needed coffee and trying to shake off the events of the previous night. The storm had subsided, leaving a thick blanket of snow across the town, and the air was crisp and still. Despite his usual routine, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Aurora. He wondered how she was doing and if she would recover fully. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Setting down his coffee, Ethan opened the door to find Lucas standing there, bundled against the cold, with a warm yet serious expression on his face. "Ethan," Lucas began, extending his hand, "I wanted to see you in person to thank you again. You saved my daughter's life, and for that, I'm forever grateful." Ethan shook his hand firmly. "I'm just glad she's okay," he replied modestly. Lucas stepped into the workshop, glancing around at the neatly organized tools and machinery. "Aurora told me what happened," he continued. "She's still resting, but she insisted I come here and speak with you." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "She's awake?" Lucas nodded with a small smile. "She's doing much better, thanks to you. The doctor said she's lucky to be alive, and I have no doubt that's because of your quick thinking." For a moment, Lucas seemed to hesitate before adding, "I also wanted to let you know who I am. I'm Lucas Halden, the owner of the Summit View Hotel. Aurora was driving up to meet me when the accident happened." Ethan blinked, surprised. "The hotel? You're the owner?" Lucas nodded. "Yes, and Aurora helps me manage the property. She had been staying there to oversee some last-minute preparations before the storm hit. She didn't tell me she was driving down the mountain to check on me until it was too late." The pieces started to fall into place in Ethan's mind. Aurora wasn't just a random stranger. She was deeply connected to the very place he had worked to protect just hours before the accident. "Thank you again, Ethan," Lucas said earnestly. "You didn't just save my daughter, you gave me back the most important person in my life." As Lucas left, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far greater. Over the next few days, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Aurora. Though he tried to focus on his work, his mind often wandered back to the hospital room and the brief moments they had shared. He hadn't expected to feel such a connection to someone he barely knew, but something about Aurora lingered in his thoughts. His quiet routine was interrupted one afternoon when a familiar car pulled up outside his workshop. Stepping out into the chilly air, Ethan saw Aurora standing by the passenger door, bundled in a coat and scarf. She waved with a soft smile, her cheeks still pale but showing a hint of color. "Didn't expect to see you up and about so soon," Ethan said, his voice warm. Aurora chuckled lightly. "I'm stubborn like that," she replied. "Besides, I wanted to thank you properly for everything." Ethan shrugged modestly. "You already thanked me. I just did what anyone would have done." Aurora shook her head, her expression growing serious. "Not everyone would have risked driving through that storm or fixing a generator in the middle of a blackout. You didn't just save me, you helped everyone in that hospital. That's not something I'll ever forget." They spent the next hour talking. Aurora shared stories about growing up helping her father with the hotel business, while Ethan told her about his journey to the small town and his life as a mechanic. Their conversation was easy, filled with laughter and moments of quiet understanding. Before she left, Aurora hesitated. "I'm staying in town for a while," she said. "Maybe I could stop by again sometime?" Ethan's lips curled into a faint smile. "I'd like that." As Aurora drove away, Ethan watched her car disappear down the road, feeling a warmth that hadn't been there in a long time. Weeks passed, and the snowstorm became a memory as the town settled back into its usual rhythm. For Ethan, life in his workshop remained busy, but his days were brightened by Aurora's frequent visits. Each time she stopped by, they found themselves lost in conversation, talking about everything from their shared love of the mountains to their dreams for the future. Aurora had extended her stay in the town, officially citing work at the hotel, but it was clear to both of them that her reasons were becoming more personal. Her bond with Ethan grew stronger, a quiet connection born out of the chaos of that fateful night. One evening, Aurora invited Ethan to dinner at the Summit View Hotel. It was the first time he had been back since the storm. The dining room, with its elegant decor and panoramic views of the snow-capped peaks, was a stark contrast to his modest workshop, but despite the luxurious setting, their conversation was just as easy and natural as ever. "You know," Aurora said, her voice soft, "I never thought a place like this could feel like home, but these past weeks, they've changed my perspective." Ethan looked at her, his gaze steady. "Sometimes it's not about the place," he said. "It's about the people you find there." Her smile was warm, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. As winter slowly gave way to spring, their connection blossomed into something undeniable. Aurora began spending more time in the town, helping her father with the hotel, but also finding reasons to be near Ethan. They often took long walks along the snowy trails, their conversations deepening as they shared their hopes and fears. One evening, as they stood on a ridge overlooking the valley, the setting sun casting golden light over the mountains, Aurora turned to Ethan. "That night you didn't just save my life," she said. "You changed it." Ethan smiled, his voice soft but firm. "You changed mine, too." Months later, as the first signs of summer appeared, Ethan and Aurora decided to face the future together. Whether it was the mountains, the quiet town, or the simple joy of being with each other, they knew they had found something worth holding on to. The storm had brought chaos, but it had also brought clarity. For Ethan and Aurora, it was the start of a new chapter, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of what was to come.